Here we are, once again, reviewing RWBY Volume 5, and yes, it is Chapter 11 this time. Hey, everybody out there in YouTube land. Jake, the OneManBand, is back again, and welcome to another edition of RWBY Review. This time we're taking a look at Chapter 11 of Volume 5. Now, this episode is the culmination of a good, I would say, 3 episodes leading up to it, and to be honest, I was very excited to see this episode actually come out. And how does it actually start out? Well, it gives us a beautiful visual of the full moon of Remnant. Yet, it's not the full moon as we have seen it normally. We're seeing the backside of the moon, the destroyed half of the moon. And it's just beautiful how it's shown right here, how you can actually see how there's just this crevice carved out of the moon, and there's still bits and pieces of it still, although detached from the moon, still hovering near it, kept there by its gravitational pull. And I just found it very fitting for what was going to be going on in this episode, because we know that tonight is the night when the trap laid by our antagonists is going to be sprung on our protagonists. And speaking of our protagonists, they're all heading over to Lionheart's meeting, and pretty much the whole trip there is pretty much eventless. The only thing that really happens is I think RWBY stops for a second to look at the Haven CCT tower, but besides that, nothing really happens. It pretty much just gives us a lineup of like, okay, these are all our protagonists, and they're all heading to the meeting where Lionheart is. And they meet Lionheart in what seems to be the main hall of the of Haven Academy. There's this ornate statue holding up this balcony type deal and multiple levels. A very big, wide open area, perfect for a battle that we know is going to happen. Now, Lionheart makes immediate notice that there are more people with Crow than there were before, and that they also brought their weapons. And he's taken aback by this, and we can tell that he's nervous. And of course, we know why, the audience. But Crow, on the other hand, is kind of confused. He's just like, yes, we brought our weapons. We're huntsmen, ya dingus. And as Crow and Lionheart are talking to one another, I find it so ironic how Raven decided to stay there, and she's just sitting there out in the open, pretty much projecting her presence, and Yang is the one that points her out. Yang is able to spot her mother with it that's in her bird form, and as soon as she draws attention to Raven, Crow doesn't even hesitate, pulls out his weapon and shoots at his own sister. Now, again, I don't know exactly why he would do this. I know that they're not on the best terms, but to be on terms where you flat out shoot at your sibling just because they happen to be there seems a little bit, I don't know. He just seems to be antsy. And this attitude of his towards his sister seems a little bit out of place when he always seemed to be someone who was trying to mitigate at least some sort of alliance, or at least reforming the bond that he used to have with Raven. And Raven is taken aback by this too. Very calmly, but seems to be a tad bit annoyed, saying, was that really necessary? okay? And we also learn here that Raven is indeed the older sibling of the two, because she refers to Crow as little brother. And my friends, it is here that Lionheart's true betrayal is finally brought to light. And just to see the hatred and the anger on Crow's face really shows just how unaware he was of someone on the height of Lionheart being able to betray Ozpin and the Huntsman like this. Just seemed to be completely out of his mind. Crow had no idea this was even possible. Raven spouts some stuff about how, well, Lionheart, he simply looked at all the information and made a choice, the only logical choice. No, there's a choice, there's always, you know, there's always a choice. He could have made a choice, the difficult one, but he didn't. There's a little bit of back and forth between Crow, Lionheart, and Raven, but it really comes down to Crow asks Raven, you have the Spring Maiden, right? And she simply answers with yes. Of course she does. We know that she does. And then once she says that, Crow, he changes his stance. He puts his weapon away and is like, then we don't need to fight each other. Bring her to us. We can fight Salem. We can do this. This is your one and only chance. He gives her one chance to make nice and to make the right decision. But of course, Raven isn't gonna have any of that. Raven is out for herself and her tribe. She only cares about herself and probably Vernal at the end of the day. And so far in the episode, everything's been going so awesome. I was loving this episode up until this point. But then it seems to take a downhill turn right here. RWBY then comes forward and does this whole speech about how we have to do stuff together and the power of friendship and all this stuff. And as much as it's true in the sense that banding together is the best thing they can do, just by the way RWBY puts it out makes it sound just childish and just out of place. Like, it isn't going to sway any hearts here. And to be honest, when RWBY came forward and did this little speech of hers, I was kind of annoyed. Because so many anime and so many shows that I've watched have done this whole where the protagonist is like this paragon of the power of friendship, where they can even sway their sworn enemies to become good guys and friends. And I just don't like that. I would prefer it if they would just fight things out. Crow gave Raven a choice. He gave her one chance to change her mind, and she wasn't going to do it. And so Crow knew what was going to happen accordingly. And wouldn't it make more sense for Crow, Raven's own brother, to give her the benefit of the doubt and try to sway her back? But instead, we're supposed to feel as if RWBY is going to be able to sway Raven even more? I don't understand. I don't know. It's probably because RWBY is the protagonist and main character of the series. But as I thought, her speech kind of falls on deaf ears and Raven isn't having any of it. However, something is brought up that is kind of important. After Raven hears RWBY's speech, she makes a comment. She talks about how RWBY sounds just like her mother, just like Summer Rose. So RWBY is even more like Summer, and more than just looks, but also attitude and lookout on life. I swear, RWBY's a clone of Summer Rose. It's more possible every single day. But the time for talking is cut off at that point. Raven then opens up one of her portals and summons to her Vernal, Cinder, Mercury, and Emerald. Cinder sending forth a fireball through the portal, first off, actually hitting RWBY with it, which kind of took me aback. I was like, oh, dang, that actually happened. What a way to start off this whole thing. And it's here that the fighting part of the episode truly begins. And, well, I have to say, it is kind of disappointing on a fighting sense. However, the fighting doesn't truly start yet. As well as Vernal, Emerald, Mercury, and Cinder coming through Raven's portal, Hazel comes through the main door that the protagonist came through and locks the door behind him, saying that the White Fang is setting charges outside. No one's getting in and no one's getting out. He is gonna be the rear guard, and it seems that he is going to be the kind of person that may not take the full fight into consideration. He's more likely gonna be the kind of guy that's going to be, okay, I'm the bouncer, nobody's going to get out. If they're gonna try to get out, I'm gonna kick them back into play. And I know that he ends up fighting Nora and Ren later, but that seemed to be his attitude when he actually arrived. And after this, we see that the White Fang are indeed outside setting charges. Bombs that are very reminiscent to the, dust bomb charges that they were developing back in Volume 2. But it seems very strange because they're setting charges on only the CCT tower? I mean, I understand what they're trying to do, but the CCT network is already down due to the beacon tower being down. So what's the point of destroying Haven's CCT tower? Wouldn't it be far better to set those charges on the dormitories or the or like the school buildings? That way the school itself is actually destroyed and not just the CCT? I mean, maybe they're just trying to send a message, but if you're going to destroy Haven, as Adam has stated so many times, then freaking destroy all of it! Come on! And we get a few more bits and pieces of information dropped here. Our protagonists learn just how deep Lionheart's betrayal actually goes, going all the way up the grapevine to Salem. And we learn that that Lionheart was actually responsible for getting Cinder and company into the Vital Festival. As you must remember, they were slated, and Cinder even stated that they had hailed from Mistral, and Haven Academy is in Mistral, so it would only make sense that Lionheart, who is in the pocket of Salem, helped them with that situation. And we also learn that Lionheart, since he is part of the city council and part of the committee that sends huntsmen out on missions, he was at least partly responsible for sending all those huntsmen that Crow was looking for previously in this volume out on missions and out to their deaths. As much as Lionheart stated that he wanted to protect the huntsmen that were at Mistral, he was essentially sending them all to their deaths, and they were either killed by Hazel or Tyrion. However, the amazingness of this scene is kind of broken when Jean decides to voice his opinion, and I understand that this is supposed to be a very emotional scene right now. Jean is once again face to face with the very woman who killed Pyrrha, and is pretty much responsible for making Jean what he is right now. And he's just spouting at her. How can she be so broken inside to be doing all these terrible things and doing all this terrible stuff? And I'm like, dude, you don't know anything about Cinder. You don't know if she's broken inside. I personally don't think she is. I think she is very much in control of who she is and what she is. I just think she is completely engrossed in what she is doing. And it just seems like Jean spouting all this emotion and getting all this out, and I feel like this is probably like he's been kind of bottling all this up and it's now just all exploded out. But it just kind of feels weird here. I don't know if it's just me, or if it's like the acting not coming out 100% alright, but it just feels like, I don't know, it just feels a little bit off to me. However, the more Jean talks, the higher the tension gets, and everyone is starting to ready their weapons, while Crow, of all people, is trying to calm the situation down. Perhaps Crow knows that, even though the protagonists have better numbers, they don't really stand a chance. However, it all culminates with Jean spouting at Cinder, asking her how can she just stand there with that damn smile on her face and not even acknowledge him. To which she simply replies with,
"Who are you again?"
But with that, the battle of this episode officially begins with Jean donning on his double-bladed broadsword and charging at Cinder. Poor fuck doesn't even stand a chance, does he? Cinder then summons a flame-imbued glass sword and takes Jean on, and she's able to match even Jean's incredible strength with only one hand. This just shows just how outmatched and outclassed Jean truly is. He is a capable swordsman. He is a very, very strong individual. But against someone who has the raw power and potential as Cinder, he really doesn't stand a chance, especially in the emotional state that he's in. If he came into this fight, you know, calm of mind and wasn't driven by emotion, he might actually have been able to enact that tactful mind of his and actually discern some form of plan. And to be honest, that's what kind of brings me out of this fight right now. I know Jean is fighting on nothing but pure emotion because it's Cinder and what Cinder has done to him. But for someone like Jean, who in the previous volume was shown to be one of the most tactful and inventive of all of Team Ranger, just to see him broken down into nothing but an emotionally charged berserker, pretty much, is kind of an insult to his character. He's supposed to be, you know, this calm and collected strategist and leader. And I know it's like, Jake, he's in an emotional state, give him a break. I understand that. But it just seems wrong that this is how we see him now after, in the last fight scene that we saw him in at the back end of Volume 4, he was still the tactful and logical-driven strategist that he was. I mean, maybe if we would have had more time through this volume where we saw, like, his mental state get worse and worse, especially in fights, like maybe in training fights, where maybe he just kept bringing up Pyrrha and how all that stuff was going on. For the most part, Jean took a back seat in this volume and hasn't really shown much emotional investment or any character investment, really. The most we see of him is we see him angsty a couple of times in this volume, but besides that, it just seems like so much of a radical switch. And maybe that's supposed to show us just how traumatized he really is because of how he is right now. But to me, it just comes off as completely out of nowhere and kind of lackluster with everything considered. What's even more strange is Cinder. Cinder is fully just alright with just taking him on and I guess having fun with him, because we all know that Jean can't take Cinder out. There's no way. Not in the state that he's in right now. But she's just liable to play along. I thought her beef was with RWBY, the girl that took her eye that hurt her so much. Why isn't she going after RWBY? I thought she had a murder boner for RWBY. But instead, Cinder decides to play with Jean and leaves RWBY for Emerald. And to be fair, Ruby tries to go and help Jean, but is stopped by Emerald. And it's here that we kind of see another thing that I don't really like. Ruby really doesn't utilize any of her normal fighting forms when fighting Emerald. We hardly ever see her on the offensive. We see a lot of Ruby being defensive and trying to talk to Emerald again, trying the whole talking power of friendship, I'm gonna turn my enemies into allies thing, instead of just fighting the people. Ruby, just fight the people. That's what we want. But no, instead she decides to take a backseat, be very defensive. We see her being a bit offensive in the background when we're concentrating on other fights. But besides that, Ruby just seems completely outclassed by Emerald. And though I will admit that Emerald might be a little bit more skilled than Ruby, Ruby is still a very capable fighter and should be at least giving Emerald at least a run for her money. But instead, we just get defensive postures and a little bit of character dialogue between them. And it is during this fight that we learn that Emerald really isn't on the Salem's faction side for the sake of Salem. She owes everything to Cinder, and she is loyal only to Cinder. Not to Salem or anyone else, but to Cinder. So, I know a lot of people are thinking that Emerald has the capability and the possibility of maybe turning good at some point and joining our protagonists, but for me, this really shows off how Emerald probably won't join the protagonist because she's so loyal to Cinder. The only way I can see her joining the protagonist is if Cinder dies and Emerald lives. In other versus matches during this fight, we see that Crow goes up against his sister. And as we learned previously in this volume, Crow and his sister Raven are pretty much equally matched when it comes to skill in combat. However, due to Crow's misfortune, bad luck semblance, it might turn into his favor if the fight goes on for long enough. However, besides their initial contact, we don't really get to see their fight at all. That would have been an amazing thing to watch, but I guess not. Yang goes up against Mercury, pretty much revitalizing their versus match from Volume 3. And that's pretty much it. Nothing really happens during that fight. They seem pretty evenly matched, which shows just how much Mercury and Yang are like on the same level, and how Mercury actually did throw the fight in Volume 3. And it kind of also shows how none of them have really made any progress since Volume 3 in terms of skill or power. Unless they have made progress and it's the same exact amount of progress. But, I mean, nothing really happens with their fight. It's pretty much just there, going on in the background. As I've said before, Hazel seems that he doesn't particularly want to fight, and he even states that he has no beef with anyone. He's just there to make sure that nobody gets out. However, Ren and Nora are more along the lines of, if you're allied with Salem, we're gonna fight you. And so Hazel just pretty much is like, fine, you've brought this on yourself, and they go at it. And really, the only time we really see them fight is off in the distance in the background, and it's the same exact animation that's used in the intro sequence. So essentially, we've already seen their fight 11 times up to this point, which makes it almost completely useless. I mean, I want to see Hazel fight, but we don't get to see it. We don't get to see any of these fights, but I'll get to that in a little bit. One of the shining points of this fight is when Oscar decides he's going to skirt away from what's going on and go up after Lionheart, probably on the bequest of Ozpin in his head. Now, as Oscar starts to approach Lionheart, we see just how afraid Lionheart really is of practically everything. He activates his weapon and points it at a child who's simply walking toward him with his arms down. And when he takes one step forward, Lionheart fires at this kid. He's intimidated by a 14-year-old child. That just shows just how broken of a man Lionheart truly is. But before we move on more to the fight between those two, let's talk about Lionheart's weapon for a little bit. Now, it's been a long time since we've seen a new weapon, and Lionheart's weapon, in my mind, is actually quite an ingenious one. It's basically a shield on his, I believe it's on his right arm, and it seems to have this cross guard kind of deal when it isn't activated, but when it is, it forms a cylindrical shield with, what I believe are different colored dust crystals periodically set throughout it. And I believe there were 8 or at least 10 of these different crystals. And when he activates this weapon, it seems to be that this weapon is purely a summoning ranged weapon in the sense of its offensive capability. He pushes a button and it selects a type of dust. He pushes another button and it selects a different type of dust. And those two dust forms are then combined to form a type of projectile. Because the two colors that are chosen are, I believe, red and green or something along those lines. However, what they create are a flaming boulder, which is then fired at Oscar. So it seems that the offensive capabilities of Lionheart's weapon is to combine forms of dust and create projectiles out of them. Now, he can probably choose one type of dust, or maybe up to at least 4, to form a giant cacophony of offensive capability. However, this does mean that he really is very dust reliant on his weapon, and besides that, all he has is a shield. As we see, he uses this weapon as a shield for a majority of this fight, blocking attacks done by Oscar. And to be completely honest, I think that's perfectly fine. This shield is meant for him to buy him time so he can get distance on his enemies so that he can fire at them with his dust-fused weaponry. And another thing to take of note, we see that Lionheart's funnest trait is a lion tail. That's actually confirmed now. So, after Lionheart is intimidated by a mere child and fires a flaming dust rock at him, we see that Oscar is still standing there, and it was actually able to get his aura up. Now I know we actually see his aura and then it goes away. I don't think that means his aura is completely depleted. I think that the writers over there at RWBY are more using whenever aura comes up like that to show that, okay, they were able to get their aura up and it's actually there. When an aura breaks, it seems to be more of a flicker and a cracking sensation in the aura. I think that Oscar still has ample amounts of aura to be okay, but he was able to actually bring it up, which is one thing that he had trouble with earlier on in the episode. He has actually shown progress from the training sessions that we've seen him go through in this episode. Unlike some other people, Jean and RWBY. Oscar then brings out his weapon and starts to attack Lionheart. Lionheart takes a pure defensive stance and simply blocks these weapon strikes. But Oscar is able to get a hit or two in. But then Lionheart recognizes the weapon for what it is. That is Ozpin's cane, and he realizes who Oscar truly is. And this completely takes him aback. He is really frightened at this point, and probably just wants to either get away or wants to destroy Oscar for what he is. However, he sees another possibility. He sees that, okay, Oscar, this child, he hasn't been Ozpin long. If I'm able to capture him and bring him to Salem, then I can be out. I can be free of this burden, of this slavery to Salem. And so that kind of revitalizes him into getting back into the fight instead of just simply running away or taking a defensive posture. Which, although is kind of a dickish thing where you're literally going to beat a child into submission and then send them off to an evil overlord just so you can get a free pass. But that's very much Lionheart's character, and I guess I couldn't really expect anything less or more from him. And finally, the last battle that's going on during all this time is the Weiss versus Vernal fight. Now, Raven stated to Vernal not to use her maiden powers against Weiss, because she simply wasn't worth it, and she should just save her power. Now, we see that Vernal doesn't have one of her Chakram type weapons, but two of them. And the fight between Weiss and Vernal is probably one of the ones that is most actually seen during this whole engagement. Weiss is shown to be very agile, using her platform glyphs to get away from Vernal and try to gain some distance and dodge Vernal's dust bullets that she's firing at her. We see that Weiss uses her ice glyph and ice dust to form an ice wall as she starts to summon her White Knight, but is cut off when Vernal slices completely through the ice wall and completely takes out her White Knight before it's fully formed. Now, this is one of the major problems that I have with this fight right here. Weiss is solely trying to summon her White Knight and is only trying to concentrate on that. Why? We've seen that Weiss is perfectly capable of taking someone on completely by herself with her other glyphs, with ice and platforms and gravity shield glyphs, time dilation, fire, wind, lightning. She has so much versatility to her and so much potential. But instead, Weiss is just solely concentrating on trying to summon. And this in itself is the sole reason why Weiss is pretty much wiped completely out in this fight. Weiss hardly even puts up a fight. Weiss has always been a very tactful and very versatile fighter. If one thing isn't particularly working, she knows that she has multiple avenues that she can use to battle against certain enemies. So why does she keep trying to do one thing? I understand that summoning is a new thing for her, and her White Knight is pretty much overpowered, and is one of, like, pretty much the only thing that she's used throughout this whole volume. But in previous volumes, we've seen her do so many different things with her glyphs and dust, as well as in the character short trailer for this volume, just how devastating she can be with her rapier. So why isn't she going full melee with Vernal? I'm very certain that Weiss could outfence Vernal. Vernal may be able to dominate Weiss while Weiss is staying at a distance, but if Weiss got up close and personal with her and put Vernal on the defensive, we don't even know what would have happened. Instead, Weiss shows that she just... It's like she doesn't know that she has other possibilities to her, when she does. We know that she put up an ice wall, why not do that again? Or use ice shards as projectiles to slip up Vernal. Or maybe do some flame attacks with flame dust. Or something. Why is... It just seems stupid for Weiss to only concentrate on summoning, and it seems very out of character for her. And it's because of this dedication that Weiss has to solely summon that leads to her being completely dominated by Vernal and actually having her aura broken by Vernal. So pretty much there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 fights going on at the same time. I'm sorry, but this is too much. I understand that we haven't had that many fights in this volume. We've had 3-ish up until this point. But now it seems that they're trying to cram all these fights into one episode at one time, all at the same time, in the same area. So instead of having one really good fight, we have like 7 individual ones going on at the same time, where only really 2 have any shining potential. That being the Lionheart versus Oscar and the Vernal versus Weiss. And even those ones are really cut short and are strange. And as I said before, Weiss isn't acting like herself. Neither is RWBY. A lot of the fighters in this fight don't seem to remember in previous volumes when you did other shit? Like did cool acrobatics and did awesome things with your scythe where you used its momentum to cover distance and hit people and knock people. And remember, Weiss, how you used to use all these different types of glyphs and actually use your rapier to get into people's defenses and get up close and personal with them. Why aren't you using any of those tactics? It seems like this concave of fights that is happening was simply put together to give more exposition, give more character moments, and to show the dominating force that is the antagonists. So instead of showing any shining examples of the protagonists, we just get shining examples of the antagonists. And when I saw this episode and when I watch it, it's really here that this episode kind of loses it for me. It seems to just lose focus and it's trying to concentrate on way too many things. And it's not showing off any of the amazing fighting styles that we saw in the previous volumes. Even in volume 4, we saw the capabilities that these characters had in previous volumes. Where's RWBY's supersonic speed? Where's all this going on? Where's, where's Weiss's multiple glyphs? Where's any of this? It's not here. And I don't understand why it's not here. However, these fights can't last forever. And as Jean and Cinder's fight continues to go on, Jean is just yelling at her to stop messing with him, and so she simply obliges, shedding off the glass framing of her weapon and fully donning a flame sword, and they go into a final charge with one another. However, RWBY catches sight of this, and while having a flashback to seeing Cinder kill Pyrrha, we see her silver eyes activate. Yeah. Okay, let me talk about this part right here. Okay, in the previous episode, when RWBY asked her questions about the relics and Ozpin's cane, when she could have brought up her silver-eyed powers and her silver eyes, she could have done that. And that maybe could have justified what happens here, but instead, they just activate randomly again for a second, and it's kind of just one of those things where it's just like, it happened randomly because she remembered a thing. She remembered the thing that made her activate them the first time. And to be honest, as much as it might seem epic and cool that she's able to do this, it really was just a slap in the face for me. Just like, ha, yeah, silver eyes are still a thing. We're still not going to explain them, though. No, we're not. No, they're just still gonna be popping up. Oh my god. It's just insulting, in my opinion, that they keep bringing up these things, but they don't explain any of it. And not only does Ruby activate her silver eyes because she remembered Pyrrha getting killed and kind of assumes that Jean is going to be killed in the same way, not only does she activate her silver eyes because of that, but she's immediately knocked out after that by Emerald. Silver-Eyed Warrior is supposed to be the most deadliest thing in the world, able to slaughter armies of Grimm, KO'd in one hit. So bringing this up, how Ruby pretty much is knocked out in one hit after her silver eyes activate, plus what was going on during her and Emerald's fight just in the past few minutes of the episode, Ruby really didn't do anything during this fight, except pretty much just get her butt whooped by Emerald. She's our protagonist, yay! However, the one thing that Ruby is able to do in this episode is through her silver eyes, Cinder full on stops in her tracks, loses her flaming sword, and grips her left arm in pain. Probably at the presence of the Silver-Eyed Warrior being there, and maybe the residual memory of what happened the first time her silver eyes were activated. However, I find it a bit strange that we don't see Vernal be affected by the silver-eyed power at all. Again, we don't really concentrate on Vernal and Weiss's fight at this moment, but not even in the background, we don't see Vernal, like, struggle or, you know, like, tumble, anything like that. We simply just see Cinder be affected by this, which in all intents and purposes makes sense. We're concentrating on Cinder right here, and, well, she was the receiving force of those silver eyes a few volumes ago. However, what makes me even more mad is when Cinder finally regains a bit of composure, she sees that Jean has come in for a killing blow. A stabbing blow on Cinder's face. One-handed. That completely takes Jean off balance and causes him to fall down. Jean, boy! Why were you stabbing a two-handed sword? One-handed. Why were you not taking a chop at Cinder? You could have decapitated her. You could have vivisected her. You could have cut her in half at the chest, at the waist, at the neck. You could have done so many things. Instead, you go for a stab at the face instead of the torso, the center mass. Again, he is emotionally compromised. I don't like emotionally compromised Jean. He is stupid Jean. And I don't like stupid Jean. However, something really big to take note of is Jean is able to hit Cinder just barely on her mask. And it does not rip as a cloth mask would. However, it chips like a glass mask, which means that Cinder's mask is made of glass and not of cloth. And that actually led me to a little bit of a revelation that I kind of want to save for a different video. What I'm going to say right now is that her mask that's covering the left side of her face is glass, the element that she's able to summon, either due to her semblance or some power that Salem was able to give her. I'm not sure yet. But with this one final move by Jean, he is out of the fight. He's on the ground, and Cinder has him under her boot. And she just states, come on, you really thought you could defeat me, of all people? And I'm like, yeah, I'm kind of with Cinder on this one. You're kind of stupid, Jean, running into that kind of fight like that. She completely outclasses you. And it's here that we learn Jean doesn't truly care about himself. If he dies, he doesn't care. All he cares, if he dies by buying other people time, then he's alright with that. All he wants to do is to help his friends and to help others. Which I think is admirable for him. He's very much that kind of person. However, it's at this point that Cinder spots a very vulnerable Weiss getting up from a attack just set off by Vernal. And Cinder decides that she's going to teach Johnny Boy a lesson about caring for others so much. And she summons a flaming spear very similar to the one that she summoned to fight Jean with, only with Jean it was a sword. And she slowly walks over, leaving Jean to cry at her to stop. And she throws the spear and is able to impale Weiss with it. It goes straight through Weiss's abdomen. However, it's more to her right side than her actual midsection. And judging by where it punctures, I would have to say that this wound is not a kill wound. As much as this moment is supposed to shock us and like just send us into a tizzy about, oh my gosh, Weiss is gonna die. That was not my thought in the slightest. I was like shocked, like, oh, holy crap, she got speared. But then when I saw where she was actually speared, I was like, oh, well, it's right there. I mean, if anything, that's gonna damage her lung and her diaphragm. Plus, if the spear was burning and is at all hot, that's gonna cauterize the wound, which means that she's not gonna bleed out. The only thing she's really got to worry about is dying of shock and really not getting medical attention in the next, I don't know, few hours, maybe. I mean, I'm no medical expert, but seeing where she was hit, that's not really a kill shot. Which, of course, then made me believe, okay, Weiss isn't dying, this is a fake out, and god damn it, it's another cliffhanger! They leave this episode on yet another cliffhanger, and even then, a cliffhanger that really isn't that much of a cliffhanger. I don't know about you guys, but with me, I am thinking Weiss isn't gonna die, that wasn't a kill shot. If anything, she's gonna be taken out of the fight until, you know, because, you know, that wound is going to take her out of the fight. And the whole idea that they've been teasing Jean getting his semblance finally, and I'm just like, his semblance is going to be some magical MacGuffin, heal him up, and he's going to heal Weiss, and she's going to be fine. And to be honest, with that in mind, this cliffhanger is completely useless. I mean, I don't know about you guys if you've been studying Jean's semblance as much as me and as much as my girlfriend and as much as my friends, but that is one of the things that I have always found fascinating and have always tried to figure out. And really, I've narrowed it down to two things. It's either going to be some sort of healing thing, thinking back to the first volume where, you know, Carden punched him and then it's like, oh, Jean's black eye was gone and stuff like that. And how when his aura was finally activated, it healed that scratch that he had on it on his cheek. But or it's going to be some sort of team buff where he's able to buff everyone else with like an inspiring word or something like that. Those are the two possibilities. And now with this actually happening, it's like, okay, he's probably gonna have the healing one. And it's just, the first part of this episode was good. I liked the first part of this episode with him, with you know, all this drama actually finally coming out and the trap finally springing. I like that. I like it when a trap is sprung and a gambit is made. I like it when that happens. But it's when the fighting started to break out that the episode kind of lost me. Way too much was going on. We didn't get to see enough of what was going on. What was going on wasn't wasn't fitting with the characters, and then it ends on a cliffhanger that I automatically know is going to be rectified in probably the next episode, and there's gonna be no consequences from it? Why? Why should I care? It's just so infuriating when stuff like this happens. I don't understand it, and I just wish that it would... I just wish Volume 5 would get a hold on itself. Why? Why?
Yes, finally, I am reborn. You thought you had seen the last of me, but now, Jacob OneManBand's unparalleled emotional trauma over this episode has reborn, Grim Master, and I am finally back and in control again.
This truly is a trying time. Jake's evil alter ego, Grim Master, has finally resurfaced and has taken control of Jake once again. Will Jake, the one-man-band, be able to prevail? Will he be able to come back from the darkness that is Grim Master? What will the next episode of RWBY Volume 5 have in store? Will it be enough to bring Jake back, or will he be lost to the darkness forever? Tune in next week to RWBY Review! And until then, be sure to like and favorite if you've enjoyed, subscribe if you feel inclined to, and, of course, be a good person, tip your waitresses, and keep moving forward. And tune in next week to see if Grim Master will reign supreme, or if the one-man-band will be able to come back from his deep, dark pit of solitude.
Yes.